Breaking tonight, the war in the Middle East now hitting close to home. Watch this. That scene caught by Fox News cameras just a couple hundred feet from the place our Fox News team is working in Gaza City. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. With growing reports of tensions between the U.S. and Israel, we are seeing what may be the heaviest offensive yet against the terror group Hamas. More than 100 airstrikes in the last 24 hours as Israel tries to take out the weapons being used to target its country. And as dramatic as that video was tonight, our crew in Gaza says the Israeli Defense Forces have, quote, brought out the big guns. Connor Powell live in Gaza City, not far from where that airstrike hit last night. Connor?
Well, Megyn, that was just one of many airstrikes that my cameraman Mal James and I have seen in the past few days. And as you said, they have gotten bigger and bigger the last few days, particularly the last sort of 36 hours or so. We had our cameras trained on that location near our facility because we have seen rockets, Hamas rockets being launched from there and Israeli artillery pounding it. And as the violence has grown in the last day and a half or so, we thought that might be a place that was targeted. Within minutes of turning our cameras there, it was hit. Before you could hear the scream of the missile, you could feel it. It was sort of what they would say a disturbance in the force. It really was this sort of feeling. And then there was shrapnel everywhere. It was a gigantic explosion. It's really what we've seen across the entire Gaza Strip the last really day and a half or so. Gigantic explosions. Israel has really ramped up its effort here in the Gaza Strip. And despite the description of precise targeting of the locations like that, when you're that close to an explosion, everything is felt and there is debris and shrapnel going everywhere, Megyn.
Connor Powell, thank you. As the death toll rises in Gaza, we are seeing a growing number of angry protests around the world against the Israelis. And some of them include some very ugly messages. Trace Gallagher tracking that from our West Coast newsroom tonight. Trace?
Megyn, the anti-Israel protests have taken place in at least 20 countries around the globe, including in Israel. And in many places, the demonstrations have sparked violence like street battles in Kashmir, the firebombing of a synagogue in Paris, and the mid-game attack on the Israeli soccer team by protesters in Austria. The concern is that many of these demonstrations against the bombardment of Gaza have instead turned into anti-Semitic protests. Here in the United States, there have been more than 130 anti-Israel protests, with California and New York leading the way. So far, the gatherings have not turned violent, but the Anti-Defamation League says many of them have featured anti-Semitism, including vandalism at a synagogue in Florida and a sign comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. And there have also, we should note, been hundreds of pro-Israeli demonstrations around the world over the past week. Megyn.
Trace Gallagher, thank you. For their part, the Israelis are blaming the rising death toll on Hamas as the terror group faces new accusations of hiding weapons behind its own vulnerable citizens. Just today, we heard reports about a stockpile of rockets found in a school run by the United Nations, a school just like this one. This is the third time rockets have been discovered in a UN-run school in less than 2 weeks. And the U.S. just wrote a $15 million check to help fund these schools. Despite these reports, Nancy Pelosi seemed to suggest over the weekend that Hamas, which we recognize as a terrorist group, is actually out to do good.
We have to confer with the Qataris, who have told me over and over again that Hamas is a humanitarian organization. Maybe they could use their influence to
the U.S. thinks they're a terrorist organization, though, correct to you?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Brooke Goldstein is a human rights attorney and director of the Lawfare Project. It is stunning. It's not like some crazy fringe group here in America says Hamas is a terrorist organization. The State Department. And she's out there saying that they're a humanitarian group. And when asked, you understand that we recognize that. Do you agree? Is the most she can muster. What just went on there?
It's shocking. I mean, I have no words for a serving politician's inability to articulate that Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization, indeed targets civilians indiscriminately for political purposes. That's why it is designated not just by the United States, by Canada, by the EU, by Japan, by most freedom-loving countries, and they make it illegal to provide any type of material support to Hamas for those very reasons. And the other thing that Pelosi said was that we had to to look to Qatar for advice on how to stop Hamas killing. That's the equivalent of saying we have to look to Al-Qaeda for advice on how to stop the next 9/11.
The defenders of that position say they're the ones Hamas will listen to.
They are the #1 financial backers of Hamas. And Qatar is one of the great motherships of terror financing. I mean, you just have to look at its charitable resume to see what it thinks is humanitarian. #1, funding Al-Qaeda in Iraq and West Africa, both designated terrorist organizations. Funding the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group in Tripoli, another designated terrorist organization. Qatar funds the Muslim Brotherhood spiritual leader, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who preaches death to Americans. Qatar is no partner for peace or a mediator. Qatar is the reason why this war is happening in the first place.
They are one of the groups that John Kerry reportedly wanted to insert into this deal to try to negotiate a peace, which Israel rejected out of hand, although Israel's not really saying specifically what they objected to. The papers are, officials in the papers are, but on camera they tell a different story. What was it that about John Kerry proposing Qatar as an intermediary on this deal that was so objectionable to the Israelis? And what was it about the deal that the Israelis thought was so egregious?
Well, Qatar is the reason why we have this war in the first place. It funds Hamas. It funds the acquisition of weapons. It funds the salary of Hamas leaders. Qatar money went towards building the tunnels. And by the way, 167 Palestinian children were killed building these tunnels. So to come to Qatar and to ask them to mediate for peace is like basically giving Qatar an award, saying, here, you can have this prestige, you can be on the world stage now.
Mediate the war that you helped start.
Exactly. And then for the United States to come in and offer $47 million is basically saying we want to replace Qatar as the chief financier of Hamas. There are no qualifications on that money. We're not calling for the disarmament of Hamas. We're not calling that money not be used, be monitored so it's not siphoned to Hamas leaders as all other humanitarian aid has been.
All right, Brooke, stand by, because I want to bring Larry Korb. He's senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and former Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Reagan. Larry, why is Nancy Pelosi first of all, why is she not putting it in her own voice? That the Qataris are telling her? She's the House Minority Leader. Doesn't she know who Hamas is?
Well, she basically said that's what the Qataris are telling her. And don't forget, the Qataris are our ally. We have a forward operating base for CENTCOM, the Central Command, in Doha. During the wars in Iraq, during the war in Iraq, that's where people like General Franks were, General Petraeus, General Abbasi. We have a military base there.
Okay, but understood. So hence John Kerry suggesting that they might be a party that could help in this negotiation between Israel and Hamas. But why is Nancy Pelosi basing her characterizations of Hamas on what the Qataris are telling her? Why doesn't she know? She's in a position to know, is she not? And secondly, why is she describing them as a humanitarian organization?
Okay, well, again, Hamas does do some humanitarian work. That's not their main purpose. But they do.
Tell it to the State Department, which says they're terrorists.
No, wait a second. Okay, you've got a terrorist group of Hamas, but who do you think is providing the day-to-day food and everything for the people there? It's Hamas is running it.
That's sweet.
So you can say that, yes, they are a terrorist group, but they do provide humanitarian stuff.
I'm sure that they are very kind about feeding their future soldiers. But when I look at Hamas's charter, Article 7, it says, the prophet, prayer and peace be upon him, said, the time will not come until Muslims fight the Jews and kill them, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, which will cry, oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me. Come on and kill him. I'm thinking they're not really so humanitarian so much as terrorists.
Well, again, they do provide, as did the Muslim Brotherhood. That's all of these groups do provide. That's why they get the support of the people. And by the way, the Israelis encouraged the development of Hamas back after they left. They were the ones who encouraged them to take over that thing. So the picture is very, very, very mixed here in terms. And listen, you've got to negotiate with your enemies. You may not like them. Look at the people we've negotiated with over the years, the Communist Chinese in Korea, the North Vietnamese. So you've got to negotiate with them.
Why did she just say that? That sounds somewhat reasonable. But to go out there and paint them as, you know, the Red Cross.
Well, I'm not defending her.
Oh, don't worry. They're just bringing food and water into the Palestinian children. Actually, they're using them as human shields, Ms. Pelosi. It's really not the group you think they are. All right, Larry, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Okay.
Well, we've also seen an ugly back and forth tonight between Tel Aviv and Washington. Have you been following this? With some Israelis looking directly at Secretary Kerry and asking, whose side is he on? The spokesman for the Israeli government is just ahead with an interesting message, and Britt Hume will weigh in on what is really going on between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Plus, we've heard a top general and a former CIA director warning us about the growing threat from Russia, talking about how Cold War II sounds about right. Up next, see how President Obama today reacted to that suggestion. And we have covered the lawsuit by an atheist group over the iconic Ground Zero cross. Tonight, a very big court ruling. You say it's disingenuous to claim it's not a religious symbol.
Of course.
Is it a little disingenuous to claim that atheists in your group are suffering dyspepsia and headaches as a result of seeing that cross included in the museum?
No. 9/11
That's not
was
disingenuous. That's true.
No.
That they're really. What is dyspepsia? What happens when they see it?